Norway Chess is underway. See what I did there? Norway underway. And it's going through June 7th. We've got Magnus in the lead with 12 points. Hikaru Nakamura not too far behind at 11. Then we got Braga 9.5. Ali Reza Fabiano. And then we have the current world champion, Ding Liren, at 2.5. Last place. Not the best tournament of his life. I mean, he's the world champion, right? But he's got no classical wins in this tournament. Only one Armageddon win, and the rest of his games are losses. And not to rub salt in the wound, but today we are going to be taking a look at his game against Magnus Carlsen, which was played today, June 2nd. Now, we have knight f3 from Magnus to start the game with the ready opening. Now, here's the thing about this game. Magnus sat down, and he said to Ding, "Good luck. I'm going to checkmate you." Not literally, but that's what he said with this game. He said, "Ding, I am going to checkmate you in this game." And let's see what I mean. We have the ready here. Very simple opening, setup for white with the bishop fianchettoing itself on the long diagonal. If you don't know, this is called a fianchetto when you put your bishop on the long diagonal like this and just castles as king. Very simple first few moves. And we have, black taking the entire center here and basically trying to say, white, you're stupid for, playing this passive little opening. I'm going to take the center. And white is going to try and chip away at it later. Like now, we have c4 immediately striking. Now, you don't necessarily want to take this if you're black, because white is just going to play like knight a3 and win back the pawn eventually. And you just gave away your central pawn for no real reason. So it's best to keep the tension, and Ding does that. He pushes d4 and takes away some more space for Magnus, tries to claim a space advantage here, and, maybe try and push this pawn down the board in the future, or maybe eventually play like rook b8, b5, and try and, open up the b file on the queen side. Now, we have e3 from Magnus chipping away at this pawn. You don't want to leave it there, otherwise it's going to kind of become a headache. So the knight develops to, add some defense to this pawn here, and d3, keeping it from advancing any further, and also opening up the dark squared bishop and the knight. Now here, this position has been reached over 400 times in the database that I'm looking at. Usually, people play bishop g5 or knight a3. And if they don't play that, they play a3. And if they don't play that, they play rook e1. And if they don't play that, they play b3, right? Magnus decides to be a little spicy and plays knight b to d2, which has been played 10 times. We went from 400 plus games to 10 games in this position. Now, we have castles from black and knight g5. So Magnus, like I said, decided, you know what, I could follow theory, or I could play knight b d2 and knight g5 and try and rip Ding's head off. So Ding gets a little ooky spookied and plays bishop back to e7, saying, ooh, I don't know what Magnus is doing, but if he's playing knight g5, then I am scared, and I am going to drop my bishop back because I am not having a great tournament, right? And so he's trying to be solid and, maybe hold a draw, go into Armageddon, hold another draw, and win that way as black, right? But Magnus launching the pawns forward on the king side. He's playing f4. Screw the king's safety, right? The king is fine over here, but you've got this weak hole on e3. If the light squared bishop ever falls off the board, then black is probably going to take advantage of the diagonal, right? It's a risky plan, but it works. f4, and he's going to play g4 and f5. I've got news for you. Ding is in a bit of trouble. Now, rook b8, as I said before. Now, the computer says this move is fine. And in fact, the best move, or one of the best moves. But here's my thing. And my thing doesn't matter because I suck at chess. But my thing, for anyone that does care, is that it's too slow. You should play a bit more active. Take some space on the queen side. Find some counterplay somewhere. Magnus, you just let him play knight g5 and f4. And you're going to play bishop e7 and rook b8 in response? Against Magnus? What? What are you doing, right? Oh, man. Now, he does get to play b5 here, but in the time that he played bishop e7, rook b8, and b5, Magnus has played g4, and he's going to go f5, right? Who cares about the queen side when you've got a very tasty king over here on the king side, right? So Magnus just defends the pawn by playing b3. And keeps it solid. Now Magnus has a passed c-pawn, and sure, the rook gets the open file. But how are you going to take advantage of that? I don't see a way, and neither does Ding. Because he tries. He tries. He plays rook b6, solidifying defense of the knight, maybe put the bishop on b7 behind the rook, you know, and he does that, right? We have a trade of knights in the center, but what is this cube of pieces over here, right? You've got like the rook in front of the bishop, and then the bishop blocked by the knight and the queen. Like, what? I don't know what's going on over here. And the bishop on e7 is doing nothing. Like, I don't know what's going on. Meanwhile, look at the black king. You got anybody defending him? They're all over here. All your pieces are on the queen side, and you've got nobody to defend your king, right? And these pawns are marching forward. So black has pieces over here playing go fish, whereas white has the knight, the pawns, the bishop, like this way, the bishop this way, the bishop this way, the h pawn, the rook's coming to the open file, the queen over here, right? Like all of this for white. What does black have? Access to none of these squares. Well, this one, I guess, but none of these squares. And how are you going to make any progress? You're not. White plays f5, and it's go time. The pawns get traded. And the knight jumps into the center, opening up the light squared bishop, centralizing the knight. A pretty good move, and it's equal, right? Because white's king is not the safest either, but, I mean, you can't get to the dark squared diagonal that he's on because the pawn is blocking it, and you can't take your own pawn, right? And the light squared diagonal is also contested by white's bishop, and I think the black king is a bit weaker now because, I mean, like I said, I drew like 50 arrows at how white can attack the king, right? So the bishop goes over to f4, pinning the knight to the queen. So black plays f6 to defend it, but now the dark squared bishop is shut out even more, right? So how is this bishop getting into the game? It's going to have to go to d6, right, to block the pin. Now here, a slight inaccuracy from black. Ding takes the knight on e4. Ding takes the knight, trying to relieve some of the tension and clarify it, right? Now, should have gone for something else, right? Maybe like queen d7, or maybe, pretend you didn't see that. Let's go forward. Maybe like bishop b4 here instead, right? Instead of taking. Maybe bishop b4 and, hitting the rook. And maybe you get something like this, where you just stop white's attack entirely, trade off all of the pieces, or a lot of them, and just try and halt white's progress and get something like this, where it's, a little bit hard to attack because you're always just going to defend and you kind of shut everything down. But instead, we have a trade of knights, or a trade of pieces in the center, allowing the queen to get active, and now you're going to have to, defend this pawn. Somehow you don't want to take this, right? Because then you get bishop c5 and you lose your queen, which is very sad. Yeah, you can play like this, but I mean, you're going to have to give up the queen. You're done for. So you don't do that. Remember, you like this pawn on d4 right now. You like that pawn as white because it keeps the bishop from seeing your king. Now, we have king going over to h1. Now attacking this pawn. Because now, if you don't do anything, if you play h6, you can just take this pawn on d4 and say, now I'm up a pawn, right? Very simple statement to say. Because the king is now no longer the dark square diagonal. But instead, we have the queen going to c5, defending the pawn, bishop back, okay? We're solid. We're maneuvering. We're improving our position. Now here, knight d7. Another passive inaccuracy from Ding. Should have played something else. Maybe even king h8. Maybe queen a3. Maybe rook doubling on the b file, right? Maybe trying to get something like this. And you could give a check. It's a little bit scary, right? It's a little bit scary because white gets some activity over here, but everything's defended. Where's the threat? You can just play h6 and trade off all the rooks. You can just trade off literally all of the pieces and get something like this, where there's no rooks, you've got some bishops and knights, a queen, you got some light squared weaknesses, sure, white is better, you got the passed pawn, but at least you're not getting mated. Let's go back. Knight back to d7. Again, like I said, a passive move. We have bishop back to f2, putting more pressure on the d4 pawn. And the bishop defends. We get a check on d5, and now this bishop is going nowhere. This bishop and this pawn are very solid, and they're not going anywhere, right? You'd have to move the rook to get the knight here and trade, and you'd have to make sure you win that passed pawn, right? The king is suffocating in the corner. The king is no breathing room, right? The bishop just, oh, that's scary. We have queen h5. This is terrifying, right? Technically, it's not the best move. The best idea for the best approach would be to play rook g1 and go for something like this, where maybe you drop back and defend, and you get maybe like rook g4, and now maybe you like double this way, but now you win the pawn, right? Now you can win the pawn on d4, and now we have two passed pawns. Very, very scary. So that's what white maybe should have gone for instead, is to put the rook on the g file and, you know, threaten some stuff over here and then win some pawns in the center in the meantime. But instead, queen h5, you know, it's a very scary move, trying to go for a scholar's mate type idea, right? And we have queen back to f8, rook e4, attacking the pawn on d4. Now here, black has to give up that pawn, right? Black has to give up the pawn on d4 and play like h6 and go for this, right? You're down a pawn, you're against Magnus. In the endgame, you got two passed pawns here, and you're probably going to lose. But maybe you can hold a draw, right? The pawns are kind of blockaded, the rook is a bit awkward, and maybe you can figure something out. You can play knight e5, that's a very nice knight. And, you know, the queen could drop back to h3, and now you can play like rook b2, try and create some counterplay ideas, and, you know, do something. You could play rook h4, eyeing the king over here, and now you can maybe even sacrifice the exchange, right, to weaken the pawns. And now you're going to play queen f7, attack this, queen e3 perhaps, and queen takes d5 check, and now things are getting interesting, right? White has to be careful here. You got to trade the queens. You don't have to trade if you're black. In fact, you might want to keep the queens on the board and play queen b5, right? Putting even more pressure, trying to get something going. And now black is the one trying to, you know, fight for something, and the black king is pretty safe. Now, sure, you can start giving checks, but that's all beside the point. Because instead of that, Liren, who, mind you, and excuse me while I pull up this game here. Well, you just saw what happened. But let's zoom out real quick so we get the timestamps. Okay. Look at the clocks. Liren has 34, almost 35 minutes on the clock. This is a 2762 rated chess player who is the current world chess champion in classical chess. And he just blundered mate in 2 with 35 minutes on the clock. And you know how long he spent on that move? About 3 minutes. Still over a half hour on the clock. And he blunders queen h7 and resigns. Magnus played that move in less than 10 seconds. And the reason it took him that long is probably because he was flabbergasted that Ding blundered this. He probably got here and, you know, Ding played rook b2 and Magnus was probably like, wait a minute. Did a little double take and then just took the pawn on h7. Queen h7. It's mate in 1 after you take. Rook h4 is checkmate. I don't know. Us amateur chess players rubbed off on Ding, right? I don't know how do you do this? I mean, your king has been attacked the entire game. Your king has no squares. I guess, I don't know if he saw the rook on it. I don't know if he missed the rook sliding over, right? That might have been what he missed. But you have to look at the most forcing moves, especially when your king is weak like this. You have to look at that. That's just a puzzle rush tactic. Wow. Yeah. Well, hey, if the world champion can do it, then we can feel a bit better about ourselves when it happens to us, can't we? All right, well, hey, if you made it to the end of this video, I'd just like to thank you as always. I reached 500 subscribers, by the way, which I am very excited about. I forgot to mention it at the beginning of the video, I think, but hey, if you made it to the end, make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already. Make it 501 if I'm not there already, and have a great rest of your day, and I'm excited to see how this tournament goes. All right, have a good one, guys.